Rutgers University's Teachers Union has taken the side of Dr. Mark Bray, the author of the Anti-Fascist Handbook, while attacking the school's Turning Point chapter that launched a petition to have him removed. Though Turning Point has faced a few other battles on some college campuses, Charlie Kirk's legacy shows no sign of slowing down in the wake of his death. Last night was an inspirational night in Mississippi for Turning Point's latest campus event. People waited for hours. You're looking at that in the cold rain just to get inside the Ole Miss auditorium. It was a packed house with incredible energy and a roaring crowd. And it got even louder once Erica Kirk took the stage. This was her only scheduled appearance at these campus tours. And the new Turning Point CEO spoke passionately about her husband, Charlie, his mission, and his legacy.
Your generation is living at a crossroads. Stand firm against the wickedness of the devil and the schemes of man. Be alert because his tactics are so clever. What he'll do is he will find one thing. He will find fear, he'll find disappointment, he will find one thing, and he will wedge it in between you and the Lord, and he will make it grow. He will make it grow so much that you lose sight. It becomes this, almost like an eclipse, where the truth is hidden behind it. And yes, the light's still there, but you can't see it anymore.
Wise words. Erica then introduced Vice President J.D. Vance. Not only did he give a roaring speech, but he answered several questions from the crowd with topics ranging from faith, the government, the shutdown, and abortion.
I think one of the critical lessons of Charlie Kirk's life to his dying breath, this was a man who never lost hope in his creator and never lost hope in the United States of America. So let's remember that and carry that forward as a way to remember. And the second thing that I want to say is, in line with despair being a sin, look, I imagine that I can tell most of you apparently agree with a lot of what I said. I'm sure that a lot of you disagree with some of the things I said. That's okay. We don't need in our political movement people who agree with us on every single issue. What we need is people of good faith who love the United States of America and are willing to work hard.
You know, it's interesting, Harris, my daughter doesn't pay attention to much news. Normally she's running through the room and once, her kids show on. But I caught her last night staring at the television for about 3 to 5 minutes watching Erica Kirk, and she was mesmerized. And it occurred to me, she'd asked me before, like, Mommy, who's a female role model? This was a few years ago and I couldn't think of any. And Erica Kirk is a female role model, and she took great interest in watching her.
I saw some social media on both from you and others last night talking about the fact, and even one mentioned what you said on the show yesterday about the shift now for particularly conservative women's voice with Erica Kirk. And I really, I respect the journey so much of getting here, but so much of it was unnecessary. We should never have quieted voices in this country. It didn't make us better. This moment seems to make us better as a country, and definitely for your daughters and our daughters as well. It does.
Yeah, and he had such a great message, and Erica carries that mantle forward. Kennedy, this was the part that my daughter was paying attention to. Listen to this.
And then he sees on his desk these 3 questions that he would ask himself every single day. And it would be, what is something I can do for someone today? The second one was, what is something I can do to add value to the world today? And the third was, how can I honor God today?
Those were the 3 questions on Charlie's desk.
And imagine those resonating in a stadium full of thousands and thousands of people who then go out into the world. They contemplate their own life and their own service and their own faith. And we so desperately need a ripple effect of people like that operating positively with good intentions, seeing other people for what they are, which is God's creation, and recognizing our common humanity when we are being so programmed to be divided and separated. And, just those 3 simple questions bring people together. And that's the kind of thing that has resonated with so many people on so many campuses before and after Charlie's assassination. So the left, instead of wondering if they should be doing more podcasts or going and meeting people at the gym, maybe they themselves should be asking those questions and doing their own self-examination and having their own positive ripple effect. Can you imagine the great influence that would have on the country if we put our politics for aside and focused on something that simple?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and it was interesting, Paul, to watch the vice president, J.D. Vance, stand there at the microphone. I can't remember how many vice presidents or another vice president who stood there and said, come, ask me anything. These questions were not screened. He said, if you disagree with me, come to the front. I want those who disagree in the front. And here's one example where he was confronted about tyrants and the use of executive power, and listen to his answer.
You are pushing out policies that hurt us, and these policies are not even solving the problems. These policies are just creating chaos.
No, ma'am, here's the thing. I can believe that the United States should lower its levels of immigration in the future, while also respecting that there are people who have come here through lawful immigration pathways that have contributed to the country. But just because one person or 10 people or 100 people came in legally and contributed to the United States of America, does that mean that we're thereby committed to let in 1 million or 10 million or 100 million people a year in the future?
That was a question he fielded on immigration. At the end, you saw the girl raising her hand. Every time he spoke, she just kept raising her hand. It was a little much. But the point is, he took those hostile questions, he answered, and engaged in civil discourse.
You know, I hate the both sidesism, but let me engage in it. Can you imagine Kamala Harris standing at the microphone and taking a series of questions, tough, challenging questions in a forum like that? Can you imagine the depth of the word salad? You'd be up to your waist. More power to him, because he's willing to say, come forward, I'll talk to you. And that exchange that we showed was very telling, because you got an emotional plea, somebody who's very committed, very clearly she believes what she's talking about. And she runs into a lawyer who has facts. Yeah. And that was a ping pong back at her, wherein he was essentially saying, listen, we have policies that are in place that have been adjudicated, that are logically worked out. They are not from the heart, they're from your head. These are things that we've thought about and are in place for the greater good. Those are the kind of tough decisions that politicians have to make. That was the voice of experience versus a young person who's just thinking like a young person does. What that means to me, we have adults in charge.
Yeah, I got to say, Donna, I was just blown away by J.D. Vance. He's not only smart, it's easy, to be smart. There's a lot of smart politicians, but he spoke with such a cadence, with such an easy stride. He was very kind to some of these hostile questioners. I mean, he's got a bright future.
Well, that's what I saw. I saw somebody who has a grassroots ability to run for president of the United States. I mean, that is the way you do it. You go to a college campus, you speak to a young generation that historically has not voted for your party, and you talk to them about the things that bother them, that they're worried about, that they are dealing with on campus, where you have two different sides of people saying one thing and another. You also have a group of people there that have been vilified for years. And now you have someone in power that's coming there willing to listen to you. He's so impressive. He's obviously an Ivy League educated person, but his background was so poor. And so he can relate to so many different groups of people. And when you look at him and where he has come in the political spectrum and how far he has gone, and now for him to take those questions and be completely authentic, I thought it was really something.
You mentioned where he came from and where he's going. I mean, sky's the limits. We'll see, and we will follow it.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.